and service.
Our thoughts, like clouds that drift and interfuse, return to antique scenes. And as we muse the clouds, the woods, the perfumes that pervade the breeze, we live again in dreams parade. So might we linger along retrospection's stream, and in our minds recreate each scene of an awesome drama in our nation's past that here took place to ever last. The same sun still shines, the summer breezes blow, the birds still sing, the flowers grow. The creek, these fields, cedar thicket, all bear silent witness to that dreadful fall when these trees were raked with murderous fire and the earth was turned into a funeral pyre. When brothers fought as friend and foe, that terrible September of long ago. How do you do? My name is Don Hoyleman. I'm standing on the battlefield at Chickamauga National Military Park in northern Georgia, only a few miles south of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chickamauga. It's an Indian word meaning river of death, and it pretty accurately describes what happened here in the latter days of September 1863. In retrospect, the Union defeat at Chickamauga during the Civil War was a paradox. It was a battle where the generals of the South, had they followed up their advantage, might well have turned the tide of the war. It was a battle of appalling mistakes, astonishing human fallibility, as well as tremendous personal heroism, fought under conditions that rival the thickest jungles of Vietnam. Chickamauga, where 124,000 soldiers of the blue and the gray came to grips, where in 17 hours, more than 34,000 men were lost. Today, many states have honored their brave soldiers who fought at Chickamauga. Among them, one stands out. For there are in this field 131 markers bearing the name Indiana. Indeed, for many, Chickamauga is synonymous with Indiana. For back home in Indiana, in the heart of Indianapolis, capital of the Hoosier State, there stands a great memorial to all of its sons who served in that grim war. It is to them that this film is gratefully dedicated.
The story of Indiana's participation in the United States Civil War has never been adequately told in a motion picture documentary. About 250,000 Indiana soldiers, many of them just lads of 15, 16, 17, took up arms and fought for their beliefs in that bloody conflict of over 100 years ago. This film, commissioned and produced by Hook Drugs Incorporated, re-explores all of the battles and the lives of the men and boys behind them. We feel you'll be amazed at learning of our Hoosier State's vital role in winning a victory for the Union Army and thus preserving our nation. It is our hope that this film can help contribute to America's future through a greater understanding of our past. The Guns of September is a special gift to the citizens of Indiana from your neighborhood Hook's drugstores.
More than a century ago, the nation was torn by dissension. Economic decisions detrimental to the South, growing cultural differences, disputed states' rights, and slavery were issues tearing apart the fabric of unity throughout the country. Everywhere laws were disobeyed, passions were inflamed, and voices of reason were rare. The mob spirit ruled, both in the streets and in the halls of Congress. The firing on Fort Sumter in April 1861 was the spark that ignited the vast tinderbox of emotions all over America, and especially in the Hoosier State. For even before President Abraham Lincoln called on the northern states for their militia, Indiana's new governor, Oliver P. Morton, a one-time lawyer from Wayne County, offered Lincoln 10,000 men. Immediately, Morton called on his state to organize military companies that would later be mustered into 6 regiments of 3-month volunteers. Expecting the war would be short, thousands of young, able-bodied Hoosiers rushed forward to serve. From the Ohio River Valley to Indiana's northern border, they came in droves to Indianapolis. In less than 7 days, over 12,000 Hoosiers were in camp. The question was not who was to go, but who would be allowed to go. So great was the response, Morton wired Lincoln he could provide 6 additional regiments. Training camps soon sprang up all over the state, so that when Lincoln called for a new volunteer force to serve for 3 years or the duration, Indiana was ready. Indiana's regiments, 5 of them, saw their first fighting in Western Virginia in June and early July. For many others, battle baptism occurred here at Bull Run near Manassas, Virginia, site of the first major engagement of the Civil War. Some 25 miles to the east is Washington, the nation's capital, that throughout the war lived in constant fear of invasion. 80 miles to the south is Richmond, capital of the Confederacy. The North's strategy was simple. Take Richmond, and the war is over. Everything was in favor of the North. Wealth, manufacturing capability, arsenals, and of course a much larger population. No one expected the war to last more than 3 months. For this reason, hundreds of Washingtonians came out to witness what they thought might be the only battle of the Civil War. Yet the war was to drag on 4 long years. Why? For a number of reasons, the principal one being poor military leadership. Super conservative, ultra-cautious generals concerned more with occupying territory than destroying armies became a constant problem for Lincoln. So it was here along Bull Run in July 1861 that a most confident Union army under General Irvin McDowell set out to destroy the Confederate army so close to its capital. But to the astonishment, if not the consternation of the people of the North, McDowell's forces were so soundly beaten, they fled the field in chaos. 13 months after the first Bull Run on this same field, the Union Army under General John Pope met the forces of General Robert E. Lee. The second Battle of Bull Run began here on the Warrenton Turnpike, near the hamlet of Gainesville. where the famed Iron Brigade that included Indiana's 19th Regiment of Volunteers fought Stonewall Jackson's troops to a standstill. The next day, Jackson was in position behind this unfinished railroad grade. Pope, believing victory near, attacked. Though Indiana's 7th Volunteers, its 20th and 63rd Infantry, as well as its 3rd Cavalry and 16th Artillery, fought gallantly, Jackson held his ground. Then cannon shredded the Union brigades. Confederate General James Longstreet arrived to roll up the Union left flank. Pope's army was forced to retreat in disorder. Now, the North was thrown into a deep state of moral depression. Enlistments were falling off. Supplies were difficult to obtain. The South, with promise apparent, was negotiating with England for support. Lincoln needed a victory. A week after Second Bull Run, Lee's victorious army was near Frederick, Maryland, hoping to win that state to the Confederacy. An unusual incident now took place. General Lee issued his Special Order 191, dividing his army into separate commands. It sent Stonewall Jackson to Harper's Ferry, while Lee took the remainder of his troops deeper into Maryland. 2 days after Lee's departure, the 1st Federal troops filtered into that same area. Under the hot morning sun, the men of Company F of Indiana's 27th Infantry settled down for a rest. It was here that 2 Hoosiers, Sergeant John M. Bloss and Private Barton W. Mitchell, noticed a discarded letter wrapped around 3 cigars. It was a copy of Lee's Special Order. Colonel Colgrove of Indiana's 27th Regiment immediately saw that the order reached his commanding general, George B. McClellan. He, in turn, saw his chance to attack the Confederate army while divided. In pursuit of Lee, McClellan was delayed when he met resistance in passes of South Mountain. A delay that enabled Stonewall Jackson, after taking Harper's Ferry, to rush his troops to Sharpsburg by the time McClellan had cornered Lee. On September 17th, the 2 armies met here across Antietam Creek, bloodiest single day of the Civil War. Facing 40,000 troops of the South were 75,000 of the North. There was skirmishing at Poffenberger Farm and in the North Woods as the Union forces advanced on the Confederate line. The battle began in this cornfield and continued in the West Woods. Fighting would be waged through the morning past Dunkard Church. As the day wore on, it moved to Bloody Lane, forcing the Confederates to retreat. Late in the day, the fighting reached Burnside Bridge. Finally, the hills below Sharpsburg, where at last it ended. McClellan had been unwilling to commit his reserves and reluctant to pursue. Lee, his troops worn and exhausted, withdrew. recrossed the Potomac River and headed south. They fought to a draw, but Lee had suffered his first strategic defeat, and Lincoln had his victory. Today, only stone marks the spot where Indiana's 14th, its 19th, and 27th Infantry fought, where the men of its 3rd Cavalry advanced. 5 days after the battle, President Lincoln issued his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation that altered the character of the war. Now, the North's objective was not only to preserve the Union, but to rid the nation of slavery. The South's chances of getting Europe to come to its aid were ended. England could never support a pro-slavery ally. After Antietam, Lincoln, dissatisfied with McClellan, replaced him with Ambrose Burnside. Defeat followed. Fredericksburg, December 1862. Poor leadership again robbed the North of a victory. Burnside was replaced by General Joe Hooker, who in May 1863 suffered defeat at Chancellorsville. Finally, in another shuffle of command, General George Meade replaced Hooker. Now Lee, riding the crest of victory, again decided to take the war into the North. By the end of June, he had crossed the Pennsylvania border, where he learned from his scouts that Meade's Union Army was near Frederick, Maryland. Lee, anticipating the encounter, gathered his scattered divisions into one compact force. Then, at this small crossroads town in Pennsylvania, brought about by a chance encounter, the two great armies collided in the greatest single battle of the war, Gettysburg. The Iron Brigade, with Indiana's 19th, met the enemy at McPherson's Ridge, west of town. By dusk, 210 of its 288 men were either killed, wounded, or missing. All 3 days, Indiana was there. The 7th Indiana, the 14th, 20th, and 27th Infantry, and part of the 1st and 3rd Cavalry. They fought them on Seminary Ridge. Then fell back to the high ground at Cemetery Hill. They met them near the Round Tops, Culp's Hill, and at Devil's Den. Indiana was there when 15,000 Confederates, led by Generals Pickett and Pettigrew, marched in close ranks to be slaughtered trying to break the Union line. Gettysburg, where the blue and gray shed their blood, where over 50,000 casualties will live forever in our nation's memory. It was a decisive Union victory. Yet Meade permitted Lee once again to take his worn and battered army across the Potomac to safety. Early in the war, before Antietam and Gettysburg, the Western Theater, west of the Allegheny Mountains, the control of the rivers was vital. Like highways, the Cumberland River led to Nashville, the Tennessee River all the way to northern Mississippi and Alabama, the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. For this reason, in September 1861, the Confederate Army fortified Columbus on the Mississippi, then built Fort Henry on the Tennessee and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland. The North held the mouth of the Ohio at Cairo. Its commander, a little-known brigadier general, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant struck back, taking Paducah. In February 1862, he took both Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, forcing the South to give up Columbus. In April, Grant moved down the Tennessee River in pursuit of the Confederate Army. He was taken by surprise at Shiloh. Here he lost 13,000 men. Indiana's 44th Volunteers alone was suffering 200 casualties. It was a costly victory, but one that gained for them strategic river positions and opened the way to Union control of western Tennessee. Still to be conquered was the lower Mississippi River. Control of the Mississippi was essential for keeping the Midwest allied with the Union. Governor Morton had expressed this need in a letter to Lincoln. Then, in late April, as if in answer to Morton's plea, a Union naval squadron under Rear Admiral David G. Farragut blasted open the mouth of the Mississippi and took New Orleans. Northward, however, the river was still held by the Confederacy at a strategic location. Vicksburg, where Confederate guns barred passage on the Mississippi. The ground here rises to easily defendable bluffs. Across the river is low delta country, a wilderness of backwater swamps, forests, and just plain mud. Although the more favorable approach was east of Vicksburg, Grant, because of broken supply lines as well as political maneuvering in Washington, was committed to a river approach to Vicksburg. So for 5 months, Grant attempted to overcome these heights. Finally, in April 1863, after many failures, Grant launched a brilliant combined naval and land maneuver. While he marched his army through the swampy lowland on the Louisiana side of the river, transports and gunboats under Admiral David D. Porter successfully fought their way past Vicksburg's powerful batteries. Within 6 weeks, Grant was across the river and approaching Vicksburg from the east. He defeated Confederate General Pemberton at Champion's Hill and Big Black Bridge, driving him back to the city fortifications. It was only after 2 aggressive direct assaults on Vicksburg failed that he reluctantly laid down a siege to starve the Confederate forces into surrender. On July 4th, 1863, one day after the victory at Gettysburg, the North had additional cause to rejoice. Vicksburg had fallen. The Mississippi soon would be open. Here, as Lincoln said, was a general who would fight. The long campaign had taken its toll on Indiana. Among its 24 regiments, some that had suffered the greatest losses were the old 8th, the 11th, 24th, 47th, and 59th. Up to now, with the exception of a small picket invasion in Newburgh, Indiana's soil had not been endangered. Soon this would change. On July 8th, Confederate General John Morgan, with 2,500 horsemen, mounted a full-scale invasion. He came from Kentucky by crossing the Ohio River at Brandenburg, to first touch Indiana soil here near Mauckport. The next day, he was in Corydon, where the Indiana Legion did its best to fend off the invader, but with little success. For 6 days and through 10 counties, Morgan burned, pillaged, and plundered the property of Hoosier citizens. At Salem, the depot was burned, the railroad bridge and tracks torn up. At Vienna, there was similar destruction. Finally, leaving a trail of havoc, Morgan crossed Indiana's border into Ohio, headed toward his eventual capture. The war had been brought closer to every Hoosier household. But all that had passed was merely prologue to that fateful September of 1863. This is one of the newly developed Spencer 7-shot repeater rifles used in the Civil War. It's a .52 caliber and uses a rim-fire cartridge. The magazine is loaded and then placed in the stock. It was far superior in firepower to the single-shot government-issue Springfield. Recognizing this was Colonel John Thomas Wilder, whose home was Greensburg, Indiana. With money borrowed from a Greensburg bank, Colonel Wilder ordered 2,000 of the weapons for his men, including the 17th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. His grateful men promised to pay him back out of their wages. Wilder was also credited with developing a new battle tactic. He mounted his men on horses so they could move swiftly without fatigue. In battle, they left their horses with a small squad of men and fought as foot soldiers. Wilder's ideas proved so effective that his men were soon known as Wilder's Lightning Brigade. A new battlefront was developing here in eastern Tennessee, where Wilder was to play a major role in Union General William Rosecrans' campaign. During the summer, Rosecrans had forced Confederate General Braxton Bragg to evacuate Tullahoma and withdraw to the seemingly impregnable city of Chattanooga, a mountain-rimmed citadel with Raccoon Mountain and Lookout Mountain to the west, Missionary Ridge to the east, and the wide, bridgeless Tennessee River to the north. To deceive Bragg, Rosecrans sent Wilder's brigade and Colonel Robert Minty's cavalry to show themselves frequently upstream here. They simulated the building of pontoons, pounded on empty barrels as though constructing boats, and shelled the city, all of which caused Bragg to mass his troops upstream, while Rosecrans crossed the river downstream behind the mountains. When Bragg learned that he had been outsmarted and that Rosecrans was threatening to cut him off from Atlanta, his supply base, he had no course open but to abandon Chattanooga and move south. So on September 9th, one of Wilder's regiments was the first to enter the city without firing a shot. Now, Rosecrans made a serious error. Believing Bragg to be in full retreat, he recklessly sent his 3 Army Corps into Georgia on an extended front. McCook's Corps toward Valley Head. Thomas's Corps into Lookout Valley. Crittenden's Corps to the south of Chattanooga. The corps were separated by as much as 50 miles. But Bragg, retreating only as far as Lafayette, Georgia, now saw an opportunity to strike his opponent in detail, 1 corps at a time. Out of Stevens Gap came the leading division of Thomas's corps, marching directly into Bragg's trap. Bragg ordered his generals to attack. They failed to obey, allowing the Union troops time to withdraw back through Stevens Gap. Then, with Crittenden's corps isolated at Lee and Gordon's Mill, Bragg had his second chance. He ordered an attack by Polk, who merely requested more troops and let the opportunity slip away. Rosecrans finally realized from these attempts that Bragg's army was not in full retreat and that his scattered corps had to be collected quickly if they were to survive. It would take him days of forced marches back through the mountains to bring the army together along the west side of Chickamauga Creek. Even as Rosecrans desperately gathered his troops, Bragg let 4 days slip away and lost his advantage. Accordingly, on September 18th, without awaiting further reinforcements, he decided to cross the Chickamauga Creek in order to place himself between Rosecrans and Chattanooga, hoping to deprive the Union Army of its communication to the north. As Bragg began his move, he encountered Minty's cavalry and Wilder's brigade holding the bridges. Skirmishing began near Reed's Bridge at 7:30 a.m. on September 18th. Colonel Minty's cavalry fought fiercely through the morning, but by noon, the Confederate cavalry pushed Minty west of the creek. At Alexander's Bridge, Wilder's 17th and 72nd Indiana regiments of mounted infantry were under fire by noon. Again and again, Confederate regiments charged, and each time were driven back by artillery fire from Eli Lilly's 18th Indiana Battery. And the Spencer rifles of Wilder's infantry halted every attempt to cross Alexander Bridge. Precious hours that were still needed to gather Rosecrans' scattered army. Finally, in danger of being surrounded, Wilder withdrew toward Vineyard Field. Throughout the night, thousands of Confederates swarmed across Chickamauga Creek. Then the last of Rosecrans' army came into position. Thomas's corps, covered by darkness, took position to the north, forming the left flank. Crittenden's corps formed the center of the line. McCook's corps, as it arrived by forced marches, took its position on the right. On Saturday, September 19th at dawn, the two armies faced each other along a 6-mile front of woods, broken by a few cleared fields, paralleling the creek from Reed's Bridge Road to near Crawfish Springs. In some areas, they were only 100 yards apart. At Jay's Mill, the battle broke out as skirmishers of Indiana's 10th Infantry under Major Van Natta discovered the Confederate cavalry. It was soon a struggle of soldiers at sea in the woods, regiments and brigades in confusion, often muzzle to muzzle with the enemy. More and more troops entered the battle as the morning wore on, including Indiana's 10th and 74th Infantry. By now, the fighting had erupted along a 3-mile front as Bragg kept trying to turn the Union left to cut off the road to Chattanooga. Then, in mid-afternoon, Confederate troops shattered the Union center and crossed Lafayette Road toward Dyer Farm. It appeared Bragg had gained his objective. Major General Joseph J. Reynolds from Lafayette, Indiana, saved the day by counterattacking and employing artillery, especially Lilly's battery. By dusk, the Confederates were pushed back east of the road. The night of September 19th was bitterly cold. Campfires were forbidden, and men lay huddled against the wind, listening to the cries of the wounded. With the Confederates between them and Chickamauga Creek, Union troops were unable to find water. Some relief was provided by the 39th Indiana under Colonel Thomas J. Harrison. His mounted men collected all the canteens they could lay their hands on, filled them at Crawfish Springs, 3 miles south, and brought 1,000 canteens to the sufferers at midnight. Meanwhile, Rosecrans set his exhausted men to work felling trees to build breastworks. Confederate hopes were lifted that night by the arrival at last of General James Longstreet, bringing with him 2 more brigades. With the enemy strung out along the Lafayette Road, Bragg reformed his army into 2 wings. The left under Longstreet, the right under the churchman, Bishop General Leonidas Pope, who was ordered to start the attack at daybreak. As dawn broke over the frosty Sunday morning, Union soldiers waited. Three miles away on a farmhouse porch, Bishop Polk, because of a breakdown in communications, dawdled away the hours reading a newspaper. It was almost 10 a.m. as church bells were tolling morning services in Chattanooga that Polk's troops finally went into action. But the attack came piecemeal, brigades in succession, instead of a wide sweep as planned. The attackers were repulsed, with the 87th and 9th Indiana Regiments helping to stem the tide. So it was around 10:30 a.m. that a Union staff officer, riding past Brannan's division entrenched in the forest, saw only what appeared to be vacant woods. He quickly reported to General Rosecrans' headquarters that there was a gap in the Federal center between Woods and Reynolds' divisions. At once, Rosecrans directed that an order be sent instructing General Woods to move up and support Reynolds' right. Woods obeyed, pulling his division out of line, marching it behind Brannan, who was still hidden in the woods. Now there was a 3/4-mile gap where none had been. As luck would have it, at that moment, Longstreet's column, 5 divisions strong, came up the wooded ridges. They moved into the open field to strike the Union line. 3 of the divisions cut the Federal center clean. Pandemonium ensued. The right wing gave way and was forced from the field. In the mass flight were Generals Rosecrans, McCook, and Crittenden, and parts of 3 divisions. Only Wilder's brigade remained. Standing firm, it covered the retreat and gave the Union left under Thomas time to draw a new line of defense on Snodgrass Hill. The 82nd Indiana, under Colonel Morton C. Hunter of Bloomington, was the first organized body of troops to take a position there. Hurriedly building breastworks of rocks and rail fences, Thomas made ready his stand. Wilder was finally forced from the field, not by the Confederates, but by orders from Charles A. Dana, Assistant Secretary of War, who wanted an escort into Chattanooga to send a telegram to Washington. With the Federal right disintegrated, Longstreet now turned to attend to the Union left. But General George H. Thomas was standing solidly in his way. Then, Longstreet threw 2 divisions against Thomas's right under John Milton Brannan from Indiana. Confederate success seemed assured as Brannan's troops were hard hit and short of ammunition. As the Confederates were about to close, General Steedman with Union reinforcements arrived to block them. He struck them head on. The fight continued until the Confederates were decisively repulsed. Having failed in flank attacks, Longstreet brought up a fresh division against the center. But again, Thomas stood fast. Having held out against 25 assaults while heavily outnumbered and practically surrounded, Thomas began withdrawal of his left wing at 5:30 from Kelly Field. In the gathering dusk, the 9th Indiana stood as a sentinel, holding off the attackers while Thomas's army withdrew behind it. By 8 o'clock, all Federal troops were gone from the hill. The last to go, 9th, 68th, and the 101st Indiana Infantry, serving as rear guard. The bitter Battle of Chickamauga had drawn to a close. The losses on both sides were appalling, with Indiana casualties equaling nearly 1/5 of the Union total. Without General George H. Thomas's stubborn stand, the day would have been a rout and complete disaster. After Chickamauga, Rosecrans' battered army got to Chattanooga without mishap, for Bragg, not realizing the completeness of his victory, did not follow. Chattanooga was turned into a fortress. Homes and businesses torn down to make blockhouses and breastworks. Bragg's army finally took position on Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain overlooking the city and prepared to besiege Rosecrans. The encirclement was not complete, but it was effective. The siege soon took its toll. Troops were on quarter rations. Horses and mules were dying by the thousands. Finally, Washington awoke to the fact that an entire Union army was trapped at Chattanooga. Grant was given command in the West. He replaced General Rosecrans with General Thomas. 20,000 troops under General Hooker moved west from Virginia, while 17,000 under General Sherman were on the way from Memphis. Grant's first action was to open a supply route into the city with the help of Hooker's troops. Then, on November 23rd, using Thomas's men, he took a low hill, Orchard Knob, driving the Confederates back to their lines on Missionary Ridge. The next day, after having crossed the Tennessee River, Sherman seized the north end of Missionary Ridge against only Confederate outpost opposition. But to his surprise, he found himself atop Goat Hill, separated by a wide and deep ravine from Tunnel Hill, the real end of the ridge. There he found General Cleburne's Confederate troops entrenched. Cleburne, with a good eye for terrain, had taken a strong position far up on the ridge. Sherman took no immediate action except to prepare his command for an offensive. In the meanwhile, on that same hazy day, General Hooker's divisions were on the other side of Lookout Mountain in Lookout Valley, preparing to circle up and around to take the mountain. Far below the mountain, on Moccasin Point, the 10th Indiana Battery under Captain William A. Naylor opened fire to cover Hooker's advance. At 8 a.m., Hooker's divisions crossed Lookout Creek. They moved steadily around the point of the mountain and up its side. The rough terrain seemed impassable. Rocks and underbrush hampered the men, made them easy targets for the Confederates with the higher ground advantage. Naylor's guns roared, clearing the way for the men to fight on. The climb ended on a large plateau, halfway up the mountain at the Craven's house, where they met the enemy in full force. The Confederates made their stand from prepared defense works behind the house. From the top of the mountain, 2 brigades were deployed to reinforce the Confederates' first line at Craven's house. The mist and haze of the morning was thickening. So by mid-afternoon, the top of the mountain was covered. Landmarks were soon lost in the fog, and the opposing forces became invisible to each other. After taking the Craven's house, the heavy fog and the shortage of ammunition caused Hooker to halt and consolidate his position. The next morning, the mountain was barely visible, but the fog was lifting, soon revealing the stars and stripes at the very top. The men in the valley and at Orchard Knob were jubilant, for Lookout Mountain had been won. During the night, the Confederate forces had withdrawn to Missionary Ridge. Now Grant could proceed with his plan. Sherman was to take the north end of Missionary Ridge and sweep down the crest. Hooker to take Rossville and move up the ridge from the south, while General Thomas with 4 divisions would hold the center between Orchard Knob and Missionary Ridge, create diversions, but not participate in the initial attack. Sherman began his attack as directed just after sunrise, his troops hitting Cleburne's division frontally, but without success. Again and again, Sherman assailed Cleburne's lines and carried the assault to within a few yards, only to be repulsed at all points. afternoon, the Confederates, greatly outnumbered but well protected, held the hill. Meanwhile, Hooker was in trouble. The retreating Confederates from Lookout Mountain had destroyed the bridge across Chattanooga Creek. His only means for crossing was to build a pontoon bridge, a delay of hours. Finally, back at Orchard Knob, Grant, realizing that neither Hooker nor Sherman had gained his objective, called on General Thomas and his long line of idle troops to relieve some of the pressure and attack the first line of Confederate breastworks at the base of the ridge. Thomas ordered his men to take these rifle pits, then stop and wait for orders. Nearing the pits, the 2.5-mile line of eager men fired a volley that thundered along the ridge. They took the pits, and then, as if by one impulse, the battle was taken out of the hands of the generals and thrust into the hearts and hands of the farm boys, office clerks, and factory workers from the Midwest. For they did not stop. They charged to the very summit of Missionary Ridge, overrunning Confederate trenches, capturing Confederate cannons, and turning them on their owners. The Confederate center disintegrated, forcing all Bragg's troops, including Claiborne's division, to withdraw. Out of the jaws of defeat at Chickamauga, here on Missionary Ridge, where modern homes now stand, came Union victory. From here, General Grant would go on to lead all the Union armies. Sherman would march to the sea. The guns of September would echo at Atlanta, at Nashville, in the Wilderness Campaign, at Richmond. And finally, at a small village, Appomattox Courthouse, where General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Confederacy's largest and most successful field army to General Ulysses S. Grant. It was in the Wilmer McLean home that General Lee accepted Grant's generous terms of surrender. Terms that allowed the ragged and hungry Confederates to receive rations, keep their horses, and return home unmolested by the federal government as long as they kept the peace. He knew they would be important measures to start North and South on the long road to reconciliation. On April 12, 1865, the Union troops could see the Confederates break camp, form ranks, and march up the road. In the stillness, a bugle called the Federals to stiff attention, a marching salute as the men passed. The disheartened Confederates responded, honor answering honor. Few eyes were dry on either side as the ragged yet proud Confederates passed, made their salutes, and stacked their arms and flags along the road. Not a cheer nor word of celebration was heard as the Union Army stood in respectful silence for their defeated brothers. On August 19, 1890, President Benjamin Harrison signed a bill creating the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. The hundreds of monuments erected here stand proud in eternal remembrance of the regiments, the brigades, and the men who bravely fought in defense of their personal convictions. This imposing structure is the John Thomas Wilder Monument, erected by his men in honor of their leader, the man from Greensburg, Indiana. No state was more generous with its human resources, none more prompt with volunteers. Nearly 250,000 soldiers came from all over the state. It had its heroes, recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And it had a tireless, iron-minded governor whose every action was dedicated to one purpose: preservation of the Union. Today, battlefields and cemeteries far from its native soil silently bear witness to Indiana's contribution.
vast, full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.